Good to be back with you again. I've just returned from a week-long preaching conference in Denver, Colorado, right before Thanksgiving. And two themes that came up frequently, and I'll see what you think about this, Denise. One of them was that to be a preacher means that you make yourself vulnerable in front of a whole room full of people. Is that true? Yes. Okay. And the second thing is that you must stand in front of a whole room full of people in confidence that God's word has some relevance for listeners' everyday lives. How about that one? Yeah. All right. Well, we got two things. So it's my privilege to be here today to bring you this message on what is actually Christ the King Sunday in the liturgical calendar, a day when we submit all of our priorities to our loyalty to Christ. The first reading then is from Proverbs 3, and this reading comes from about 500 years before the birth of Christ. The Israelites had been in exile for 70 years in Babylon. They were now returning. Their actual grandchildren were returning. And the youth were aimless and without a future. And so the wise teachers came up with these words for living for their young. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways, in all your ways, in all your ways, acknowledge God, and God will make straight your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be a healing for your flesh and a refreshment for your body. And then from Matthew, the 11th chapter. This passage is a beautiful, very comforting passage. It's like this beautiful pastel sort of painting in the middle of a very jagged frame, because on either side of it, Jesus is saying, you got to take up your cross, you're going to suffer, there will be issues and burdens. And on the other side of it, he gets in trouble for picking grain on the Sabbath. So it's in the middle of all this conflict. And in the middle, this passage comes. Come unto me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When I heard the theme of your sermon series was disruption, I was inspired to write a poem. I didn't say I was a poet. I said I was inspired to write a poem. The good news for you all is that it's only one verse, and it goes like this. Hello, disruption, my old friend. Why must you lurk around every bend? What a drag it is to see you again. Disruption is a disturbance that interrupts a process. Could be good or bad, right? But many times we experience them as negative. They range from minor irritations, tech and traffic, which leave us asking, what happened to the day I had planned, to major derailments, which leave us asking, what happened to the future that I had planned? Minor things can disrupt and make you late for work. Health challenges can disrupt, and suddenly your 3-day getaway becomes a 4-day hospital stay, all inclusive. Natural disasters can disrupt, and we hear of a 6-year-old boy who's celebrating his 7th birthday in a shelter because his home has been burned in Camp Fire in California. No home, no birthday in sight. The mistakes of other people can disrupt. So Botham Jean is sitting in his apartment, and a police officer mistakes his door for hers. So a young woman I know is crossing the street in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, on her way to work, and a driver blows through the crosswalk. She's now with a brain bleed in ICU, but things are looking up. She's getting better. And guess what? What was he doing? Texting, right? So minor disruptions, major disruptions, many of them negative. And again, they come toward us. So one way that we can respond to this, again and again, is by pessimism. When our son, who's now 30, Matthew, was in the 5th grade at Green Elementary School in Allen, he had a teacher who decided that a great unit would be to do words for living. And she had each child write to a celebrity, a local celebrity, and ask for an 8x10 glossy with their words for living written at the bottom. So on back to school night, I walked into the classroom, and there was this big bulletin board, and here was a picture of Gloria Campos. Remember Gloria Campos, the Channel 8 news anchor for a number of years? And she had written on her picture, "Reach for the stars." And then there was a picture of Troy Aikman, then quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and at the bottom of his picture he had written, "If you can conceive it and believe it, you can what? Achieve it." Yes. And then at the very bottom, amid all these glossy pictures, there was this little index card, and there were some words scrawled on it, and there was no picture next to it. And I walked toward it, and I recognized our son's handwriting. And I bent down and looked at it. I knew that Matthew, a huge Beatles fan, had written to Sir Paul McCartney. Well, I mean, he took Gloria's advice, right? Reach for the stars. But apparently, friends, the road from Sir Paul's home to his mailbox was too long and winding. I had to do that. No picture. Instead, Matt had scrawled on the little card, "Expect the worst, and you'll never be disappointed." Benjamin Franklin, like Eeyore, right? That is one way to respond. I mean, sometimes it does feel, in these major derailments like loss of relationship, loss of loved ones, death, it does feel like you're sitting in a darkened theater and you've designed all these beautiful sets and you've written all the script and you're there watching, and suddenly in the middle of it, the house lights go up and the stage crew comes on and they roll off all these beautiful sets that you've made and they interrupt the dialogue and you're sitting there thinking, what? I didn't write this. What happened to the future that I had planned? So we do tend to fall sometimes into expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed. But the scriptures offer us better words for living in Proverbs 3. And for a moment, I want you to imagine what the author of Proverbs 3 would say to Christ United Methodist Church on this Sunday after Thanksgiving. Remember, these words come from about 500 years before Jesus' birth. And I think the author might say something like this: "You know, friends, I know a thing or two about disruption. My grandparents saw the Babylonians burn the temple, burn the king's palace, and saw them being forced marched off to Babylon for 70 years. And now we're back, we're old, and we're watching our children in Jerusalem wander around the rubble of the temple and the palace, aimless, with no future before them. And we need to get together. We need to come up with some words. And so we're going to come up with this figure of woman wisdom, this prophetess who embodies the wisdom of God. And she's going to stand at the crossroads. And again and again and again, she's going to invite the young and everybody else to trust in the Lord with all your heart. And do not rely on your own insights in all your ways. Not some situations, not a limited radius. All your ways acknowledge God, and God will make straight your paths. Not in the sense, this is not a promise that you will have a future free from all disruption, but that you will have a future that is filled with the presence of God, come what may. Come what may. And we know what's coming. I just love coming around and telling people good news. We know what's coming. Next week is the first Sunday of Advent, isn't it? We know that though disruptions come again and again and again, God is coming closer and closer. We expect the coming of God's Son all 4 Sundays of Advent. Here we have God incarnate. Wisdom is this beautiful poetic personification, but Jesus is a real human being, fully human, fully divine. Jesus was a baby. Jesus was a baby born into a perilous world, ruled over by a paranoid and violent king, to poor and vulnerable parents. And he's going to grow up like all babies do. And he is going to experience all the negative disruptions that you or I could ever experience, except for one, and that is, you know how we say old age is not for sissies? He's not going to have to experience old age. Why? Because he experiences a gruesome, grueling death at age 33. And before that, he experiences rejection by his friends and the leaders he's trying to teach. He experiences the death of his cousin, John the Baptist. He takes it all on. The incarnation is an invitation for you to put it all on Jesus. His invitation to you. He says in Matthew 11, "Come unto me." These words that have been very comforting to me in the disruptions of my life. "Come unto me, all ye who labor." Wouldn't that be about everybody here? "And are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my burden is light, my yoke is easy." He's not promising a future with no burdens, no challenges, no disruptions, but he is promising that they will all be half as heavy if we allow him to bear them with us. Jesus is the best example we have of doing this himself, of entrusting his future into the hands of God. But we got to give credit where credit is due. He's taking a page out of his mother's playbook. Do you remember the story of this young girl, barely 14 years old? She wakes up in the middle of one night, and there's an angel at the foot of her bed. And the angel goes into this lengthy explanation of a part that she's going to play in a sort of divine disruption of all evil and injustice in the world. And after asking a couple of highly practical questions, I imagine her perhaps taking a deep breath and saying, well, this isn't in Scripture, I'm just imagining this, saying, well, alrighty then. Behold, I am the handmaid, I'm the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me as you have said. If you say nothing is impossible with God, angel at the foot of my bed, Gabriel, my friend, all right then. I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me as you have said. We've talked about negative disruptions coming at us again and again and again, but you know there's such a thing as a divine disruption. That's what she experienced. Now, I'm not saying we're going to see an angel at the foot of our bed, but throughout our lives, again and again and again, comes a still, small voice, a nudge, a prod, a prickling of our conscience, inviting us, nudging us to participate in God's project, God's process of bringing about justice and joy for the whole human community and opposing any force that furthers sorrow and injustice in the world today. Think about it. We're Protestants, right? We're Protestants, proud Protestants. Martin Luther was a disruptor. He was called by contemporaries the divine disruptor. because he shook up the Roman Catholic Church and its unfair practices. John Wesley, actually very conventional man, although a man of deep prayer. He listened to that little voice and he got out of the sanctuary and he stood by the path when the miners came up from the mines near Bristol. And he offered them Christ instead of gin. And then in the 1800s, the slave preachers were told by the master, you preach to the slaves, slaves be obedient to your masters. But instead, the slave preachers went to the hush harbors, which were blankets soaked in water and hung amid the trees to muffle the sound of the preaching and the praying, and they replaced the master's script with, let my people go, and disrupted the brutality of the daily lives of their listeners. Divine disruption. Maybe that young woman, as she gets out of ICU and gets on the road to recovery, maybe she'll hear this voice telling her to, you know what, do something so that you can make this state in which this happened one of, added to the 16 other states where using handheld devices while driving is illegal. And maybe, in response to Botham Jean, a group of people of faith, black and white, can get together and can dialogue about the ongoing racial tensions in this country. And maybe, I don't know what that divine disruptive voice is prodding you to speak out and act out about. I do know that at our baptism, either for us or by us, it was promised that we will oppose evil and injustice in whatever forms they present themselves. So it is our divine calling, whether it's anti-Semitism or homophobia or gun violence or speaking out about the damage we're doing to our climate, it is our divine calling to disrupt any power that works against God's plan for justice and for joy. Speaking of disruption, a couple of years ago, just let me say one more thing about disruption. In my experience, the divine call to be a disruptor will come again and again and again, and it will not stop until we respond to it. So, a couple years ago, my husband Murray and I were in England. We were doing this John Wesley tour. I can't say it was a deeply spiritual tour. I was more, at that point, a tourist, sort of on a historical pilgrimage, I guess. But we were at John Wesley's new room in Bristol, England. And we paid £10 for admission each, which actually was a small price to pay to tour the earliest Methodist chapel ever built in 1739. Downstairs, there's a lovely chapel. Some of you may have been there. Upstairs, there is a museum, and there are the rooms where John Wesley's ministers, preachers, would stay when they came back from their rounds. And he himself lived there off and on in the late 1740s. So I'm walking around, and I am in rapt reverie with this picture on the wall, big picture. And it is artist Kenneth Wyatt's picture called Offer Them Christ. And it shows an elderly John Wesley saying goodbye to Thomas Coit. Can you say that after me? Thomas Coit. That will be important later. Thomas Coit was the first superintendent in America to spread Methodism. And Wesley sent him off. So it's Wesley saying goodbye to Thomas Coit, Offer Them Christ. So I'm there sort of wrapped in attention to this painting. And I hear a cheery voice say, "Hello, dear. How are you? I turned around and looked into, how can I put this, the extremely mature face of a woman, petite woman, and she had a plaque on, and it simply said docent, which I've learned over the years means someone who guides you through a historical site, pointing out things that you might normally miss. Kind of turns a tourist into a pilgrim, perhaps. So, docent. She said, "Oh dear, I'm always so pleased when you young people come and visit, I'll take it, our new room." She said, come, this way. And to say that she led me would be a little mild. She said, look, dear. She dragged me to a kneeling bench that looked out over the front of the building. She said, look, dear. This was John Wesley's kneeling bench. Look at the indents of his knees. She forced me. She said, look, dear, see if your knees fit into the indents of his. John Wesley was a man of prayer, dear. Are you a woman of prayer? John Wesley prayed in the morning, dear. Oh, he prayed as his preachers went out on their rounds, and then at noon again he prayed, praying for their efforts on behalf of Christ. And then in the twilight, as the sun was setting, he knelt here and he prayed, hoping that they had had a good day as they came back to him again. John Wesley was a man of prayer, dear. Are you a woman of prayer? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I began to rise, but back down again we are for a second time. And John Wesley was a man of prayer, dear. Are you a woman of prayer? Look, here are the indents of his knees. See if your knees fit his knees. He would pray here in the morning as his preachers went out. He would pray here at noon, praying for their efforts on behalf of Christ. And in the twilight, he would pray as they returned safely to him at last. John Wesley was a man of prayer, dear. Are you a woman of prayer? I said, yes, ma'am, I am. I'm a Methodist from Texas. And tried to rise again, but we're back down. And as she began her third time around the track, I began to plan my escape route. So she gets to the end. John Wesley was a man of prayer, dear. Are you a woman of prayer? I rose with all the vitality I could muster to my feet in one fluid motion. And I took her elbow in a strong but firm grip, and I said, look at that picture. I have always loved that picture of John Wesley saying goodbye to George Whitefield as he sent him to America. Oh, no, dear, no. Come with me, dear. That is Thomas Coke, not John Whitefield. And we're out of the loop. We're out of the loop. So what was up with that? What? I thought, well, maybe news of my sporadic prayer life had crossed the pond. That's one option. The other option is that maybe she was caught in some kind of short-term memory loop that we're perhaps familiar with. The other option is that maybe she was just messing with me. But the option that I've chosen for myself is that maybe she was my own personal divine disruption. Thanks be to God. Amen.